Bonjour and welcome viewers and students to Let's Speak French, Parlons Français. These lessons on basic French are short and easy, and if you follow the program regularly, I can assure you that very soon you will be able to understand French quite easily. The previous session focused on the different structures that are used for advising someone. In today's class, we will learn about relative pronouns. This lesson has been divided into 3 sections. In the first section, I will read out a French text where these pronouns occur several times. Then in the next section, I will explain what these pronouns are and how to use them. And finally, in the third section, we will do an exercise to revise what we learned in today's session. We'll begin the lesson with a French text. This text tells how Isabelle, who is studying in Paris, misses her village and her family in Corsica. Mal du pays. Le village natal d'Isabelle lui manque beaucoup. Ce petit village pittoresque qu'elle aime tellement est connu comme un des plus beaux villages français. C'est un village qui compte une faible population. Situé au centre-ouest de la Corse, ce village qui s'appelle Piana est célèbre pour ses magnifiques calanques. Isabelle se souvient combien elle s'amusait durant l'été dans son village. Pendant la saison touristique, Isabelle offrait ses services à un club qui organisait des randonnées et des visites guidées à vélo pour les touristes. L'après-midi, lorsqu'il faisait un peu trop chaud pour des balades, elle passait la journée sur la plage avec des amis. Ces tendres souvenirs qu'Isabelle revit lui apportent souvent les larmes aux yeux. La famille d'Isabelle qui habite encore à Piana lui manque aussi. Le père d'Isabelle, que tout le monde appelle capitaine, est un des meilleurs pêcheurs. Chaque matin, le père d'Isabelle va à la mer avec 2 bateaux de pêche. Il barre le bateau que son père a construit, tandis que Phil, son fils, barre le second bateau. Ils restent à la mer jusqu'à midi. Ensuite, ils rentrent chez eux avec les poissons qu'ils ont attrapés. La maman d'Isabelle nettoie les poissons et les prépare pour le soir. À 5 heures, la famille d'Isabelle ouvre « Chez nous », le restaurant familial que la grand-mère d'Isabelle avait établi lorsqu'elle était jeune. Isabelle veut rentrer chez elle. Elle n'aime pas sa vie parisienne. La ville est sans doute belle, mais vide. Les gens qui la croisent dans la rue sont froids. Personne ne fait attention lorsqu'elle sourit. La chaleur et la convivialité qui règnent à Piana n'existent pas chez les Parisiens. Mais heureusement, elle a des amis sympathiques qui comprennent sa tristesse. So this was a short text where relative pronouns have been used many times. In the next section, I will explain to you all about these pronouns. Before we learn about relative pronouns, let me briefly explain to you what a clause is. A clause is a basic sentence which consists of at least one subject and a verb. The difference between a clause and a sentence is that the latter can be composed of 2 or more clauses. In other words, a sentence is a more complex structure which can comprise 2 or more clauses. These clauses are connected to each other through 2 types of words. Conjunctions such as and, but, however, etc. and relative pronouns. There are different categories of clauses, but I will only explain what a main clause and a subordinate clause are, because they are related to our lesson. A main clause is an independent clause that can be used on its own. A subordinate clause, on the other hand, can never be used independently because it always begins with a relative pronoun. It needs to be attached to the main clause. So when a sentence has more than one verb, the different verbs generally indicate a different clause. Now that we know what a main clause and a subordinate clause are, let us begin our lesson on relative pronouns. Relative pronouns are, first and foremost, pronouns. A pronoun, as we know, replaces a noun previously mentioned in order to avoid repetition. A relative pronoun, however, is a slightly complex pronoun. Apart from replacing a noun which is known as the antecedent, relative pronouns also introduce a clause that describes or explains the antecedent. By introducing a clause, the relative pronoun is actually linking two clauses and making one single sentence. The clause that is introduced by the relative pronoun is the subordinate clause. The subordinate clause brings additional information to the main clause by describing the antecedent. In French, there are two main relative pronouns, qui and que, which are translated as that, which, or who in English. Let me show you an example of how a relative pronoun can unify two clauses into one sentence. Je vais au parc, I go to the park. This is my main clause. Now, if I wish to describe the park, for example, indicate its location, I could add a second clause. Les soirs, je vais au parc. Le parc se trouve derrière ma maison. In the evenings, I go to the park. The park is situated behind my house. Now we have two clauses or two sentences, and we notice that the word park is repeated. So to avoid the repetition, we replace park with the relative pronoun qui. This replacement not only avoids a repetition, but it also binds the two clauses into one sentence. Les soirs, je vais au parc qui se trouve derrière ma maison. In the evenings, I go to the park that is situated behind my house. Upon replacing the antecedent with the relative pronoun, the two clauses automatically unify. The full stop that separates the two clauses is removed so that the two clauses join into one sentence. Although there is now one single sentence, the two clauses are distinct. Les soirs, je vais au parc is the main clause, while qui se trouve derrière ma maison is the subordinate clause. Let me show you another example. Nous mangeons les pommes. Maman apporte les pommes. We are eating apples. Mother brings the apples. We notice the word les pommes is repeated. So to avoid the repetition, we replace les pommes with the relative pronoun que. Replacing a word with the relative pronoun que requires a change in the word order. So the new sentence is Nous mangeons les pommes que maman apporte. We are eating the apples that mother brings. Now that you have learned the two forms and the function of the relative pronouns, let me show you how to know which relative pronoun to use. Should you use qui or should you use que? Both are relative pronouns, but they cannot be used interchangeably. The factor that decides which relative pronoun is to be used is the grammatical role that the relative pronoun plays in the subordinate clause. Let me illustrate this with an example. To simplify things, we will first divide the sentence into clauses. Next, we will identify which word or term needs to be replaced. Then finally, depending on the role of the replaced term, we can decide which relative pronoun to use. Let's consider the previous example. Les soirs, je vais au parc. Le parc se trouve derrière ma maison. Next, let us identify the term that needs to be replaced. We see that le parc is repeated in both sentences. So this is the word that needs to be omitted and replaced with the relative pronoun. Now we will focus on the second clause to see what the role of le parc in this clause is. The reason why we focus on this clause and not on the first clause is because a pronoun always replaces a term that is repeated, not a term that is mentioned for the first time. So in the second clause, le parc is the subject. When a relative pronoun replaces a word, it assumes the role of that word. Le parc is the subject, hence the relative pronoun that replaces it assumes the role of the subject. So when the relative pronoun is a subject, qui must be used. Les soirs, je vais au parc qui se trouve derrière ma maison. In this sentence, les soirs, je vais au parc is considered the main clause, while qui se trouve derrière ma maison is the subordinate clause. The relative pronoun qui is the subject of the subordinate clause. I'll now give you a second example, but this time we'll not have two separate clauses but one single sentence. Identifying the grammatical role of the relative pronoun gets a bit challenging when the clauses are combined. Let's consider a sentence from the text. Isabelle a des amis sympathiques qui comprennent sa tristesse. Isabelle has kind friends who understand her sadness. It always helps to divide the sentence into clauses and then identify the role of the relative pronoun. If we divide this sentence into two clauses, we have Isabelle a des amis sympathiques. Les amis sympathiques comprennent sa tristesse. Now we follow the same procedure as the above examples. Les amis sympathiques, which is repeated in both clauses, will be replaced by a relative pronoun. Since les amis sympathiques is the subject of the second clause, qui is used to replace it. Here are a few more examples from the text where the relative pronoun qui has been used. C'est un village qui compte une faible population. It's a village that has a small population. Ce village qui s'appelle Piana est célèbre pour ses calanques. This village called Piana is famous for its rocky inlets. Isabelle offrait ses services à un club qui organisait des randonnées pour les touristes. Isabelle volunteered at a club that organized treks for the tourists. Now I'll show you when to use que. Que is used when the word that is replaced is the object of the subordinate clause. Let me illustrate this with an example. We'll again begin with the clauses or two sentences. Nous mangeons les pommes. Maman apporte les pommes. We are eating apples. Mother brings the apples. The term that is repeated and therefore needs to be replaced is les pommes. This term will be replaced in the second clause and not in the first one. The role of les pommes in the second clause is that of the object. Since the relative pronoun will be replacing an object, it assumes the role of the object. When the relative pronoun is the object of the subordinate clause, we need to use que. The new sentence will therefore be Nous mangeons les pommes que maman apporte. We are eating the apples that mother brings. One important point regarding this replacement is the change in word order. Since the subordinate clause, which begins with a relative pronoun, describes or explains the antecedent, it will always be placed directly after the antecedent. I'll give you a second example, but this time will not have two separate clauses but one single sentence. Let's consider a sentence from the text. Il barre le bateau que son père a construit. He steers the boat his father built. Let's begin by dividing the sentence into clauses and then identifying the role of the relative pronoun. If we divide this sentence into two clauses, we have Il barre le bateau, he steers the boat. Son père a construit le bateau, his father built the boat. Now we follow the same procedure as the above example. Le bateau, which is repeated in both clauses, will be replaced by the relative pronoun. Since le bateau is the object of the second clause, que is used to replace it. We have two more examples of que in the text. La famille d'Isabelle ouvre le restaurant familial que la grand-mère d'Isabelle avait établi lorsqu'elle était jeune. Isabelle's family opens the family restaurant which her grandmother had started when she was young. Le père d'Isabelle, que tout le monde appelle capitaine, est un des meilleurs pêcheurs. Isabelle's father, whom everyone calls captain, is one of the best fishermen. The relative pronoun que becomes QU apostrophe before a vowel. The elision does not occur with qui. We have two examples in the text where que is written as QU apostrophe. Ce petit village pittoresque qu'elle aime tellement est un des plus beaux villages français. This little picturesque village, which she loves so much, is one of the most beautiful French villages. Ces tendres souvenirs qu'Isabelle revit apportent souvent les larmes aux yeux. These fond memories that Isabelle relives often bring tears to her eyes. One last point that I will make regarding the relative pronouns is the agreement of the past participle with qui and que. Although the relative pronouns are invariable, they agree with the gender and number of the antecedent. When the subordinate clause is in the compound past, the past participle agrees with que, since que functions as the direct object that precedes the verb. If the verb of the subordinate clause uses the auxiliary être for the compound past, the past participle will agree in number and gender with qui. Here's an example from the text. Ils rentrent chez eux avec les poissons qu'ils ont attrapés. They returned home with the fish they had caught. Que replaces les poissons, which is the direct object of the verb attraper. Since the object is masculine plural, the past participle of the verb reflects the agreement. Before we proceed to the third section, let me summarize the lesson on relative pronouns in French. There are two main relative pronouns, que and qui. Que is used when the antecedent is the object of the subordinate clause. Que changes to QU apostrophe in front of a vowel. Qui is used when the antecedent is the subject of the subordinate clause. In the compound tense, the past participle of the verb will agree in number and gender with que, since que functions as the direct object that precedes the verb. If the verb of the subordinate clause uses the auxiliary être for the compound tenses, the past participle will agree in number and gender with qui. In this third section, we will revise what we learned on today's session on relative pronouns. A short exercise has been provided below. Join the two clauses to make one sentence using qui or que. J'arrose les plantes. Les plantes sont au balcon. In this sentence, les plantes is the subject of the second clause. So we replace les plantes with qui. J'arrose les plantes qui sont au balcon. This sentence translates as I'm watering the plants that are in the balcony. Elle lit la lettre. Son mari lui a écrit la lettre. In this sentence, la lettre is the direct object of the second clause. So we replace la lettre with que. Since la lettre is feminine singular, we add e to the past participle of écrire. Elle lit la lettre que son mari lui a écrite. This sentence translates as she is reading the letter her husband wrote to her. Les enfants ramassent les fleurs. Les fleurs sont par terre. Les fleurs is the subject of the second clause. So we replace les fleurs with qui. Les enfants ramassent les fleurs qui sont par terre. This sentence translates as the children pick up the flowers that are on the ground. J'ai acheté les chemises. Tu m'as recommandé les chemises. Les chemises is the direct object of the second clause. So we replace les chemises with que. Since les chemises is feminine plural, we add es to the past participle of recommander. J'ai acheté les chemises que tu m'as recommandées. This sentence translates as I bought the shirts you recommended. Il regarde les étoiles. Les étoiles brillent dans le ciel. Les étoiles is the subject of the second clause. So we replace les étoiles with qui. Il regarde les étoiles qui brillent dans le ciel. This sentence translates as he watches the stars that shine in the sky. With this, we come to the end of our third lesson. This lesson was divided into 3 sections. In the first section, I read out a French text where these pronouns occurred several times. In the second section, I explained what these pronouns are and how to use them. And finally, in the third section, we revised today's lesson by doing an exercise. I hope you enjoyed today's session. In the next lesson, we'll learn about the structures used for comparing two objects. I hope to see you in the next session. Thank you and à bientôt. See you soon.